Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Nick's Handpicked Guitars. Today we're checking out an all-original 1965 Fender Jaguar. Now this isn't my guitar, this is actually our editor's guitar, Derek. Derek's been editing the videos that you've been watching here on YouTube, and this is the story about how he obtained one of his dream guitars, this Jaguar you're seeing right here. On top of that, we're going to go into the specifics of this guitar itself, do a deep dive into what makes a 60s Jaguar a cool instrument. And then let's talk a little bit about the value of this guitar as well, and what does that look like in the market from an investment standpoint. Because people ask me, they go, Nick, is there more of an investment to a vintage guitar than just the sound and the looks of a vintage instrument? Of course there is. Let's dive into this 1965 Fender Jaguar. So again, this not being my guitar, I did have to learn about the story. How did Derek obtain this guitar? How did it end up in his hands? This is one that he's been looking for a long time for. And honestly, maybe thought that he would not be able to obtain an instrument like this until he was in his later on in his years, in his 50s even. Through the power of buying and selling and working deals with people, you too can obtain instruments like this. That's how this happened with Derek, right? He was looking for that guitar. He was looking for the vintage 60s Jaguar in the original condition, something that he can really be proud of. Way back when Derek was growing up, he told me that his uncle actually had two 60s Jaguars. I believe one was a 64 and one might have been a 66. Either way, from the same exact era as this guitar. And as a little kid, Derek goes, someday I'm going to own that guitar. Maybe not that exact one, but one just like it. I totally get that. For me, it's the 1955 Gibson Les Paul Custom. The Black Beauty with the ivory, the tuning heads on the tip. I've always said, hey, that's going to be the guitar that I will own one day. Through the power of connecting with people and buying and selling guitars. So Derek, after doing years of research, literally years, always looking for these guitars, trying to work deals, he actually came across one locally. Now this guitar itself actually used to be owned by a guy, let's call him Mike. Now this was Mike's grandfather's guitar. How cool is that? It's one of those full circle moments, right, where Mike now obtains this guitar, and he's not a guitar player himself, but he knows that the value's there. It's an antique instrument, so it's worth money. But even more so, he knows that the family heirloom and, above all else, the legacy of somebody that he loves shines through this instrument right here. It took some time. Derek was like, hey, you know what? I would be very much a buyer if you ever would, want to send that guitar off to a new home. And sure enough, full circle it happens where Derek gets the opportunity to obtain this guitar, and through trading and through, being able to be in a situation and obtain this guitar the right way, he did just that. Derek was able to find himself a 1965 Jaguar in beautiful, all-original condition. It has an amazing burst on it. I love the red coming through on this burst. I love the red coming through it. It stands out, in my opinion, unique to other Jaguars of the era. But the main thing above all else is that, when these vintage guitars show up, there's so much more to a guitar than just that it's an old antique and supply and demand, right? That it has value. So how cool is it that full circle that Derek's able to get this guitar and he's able to be back out there making music with it. Derek plays at his local church. He does a lot of worship music. To be back out there making music, what it's supposed to do, I'd argue that is maybe what Mike's grandfather would have wanted all along. So now Derek has this guitar and it's really amazing. But let's dive into this guitar specifically. Let's find out what makes a 1965 Fender Jaguar cool. What was Fender doing back in 65? And they were doing some kind of, in my opinion, maybe silly things, stuff that was all about innovation of music at that era. So let's dive into this guitar. So let's go back to 1965 and let's look at a little bit of American and a little bit of business history. In that era in Fender, right? Fender guitars started out in Southern California by Mr. Fender himself. He created guitars out of his garage, and it led to being a massive corporation. In the vintage Fender world, you'll hear a lot about the term pre-CBS, meaning that guitars made by the original Fender people at the original factory before that era of about 1965 is literally that transition year. Earlier examples of 65 will show features of more pre-CBS guitars, and later 65 will show more features of CBS guitars. So it's really cool to have a guitar that not only is all original from an aspect of value and originality, but this guitar was a transition of Fender, a massive company that to this day is still making guitars. When the Fender Jaguar was first introduced, it was the most expensive offering from Fender at the time. The Jaguar was marketed as a professional high-end instrument, which was very much designed for working musicians and not beginners. So from that timeline and back in that era, the prestige alone of this guitar makes it really cool to have an original example in my hands here in modern day. These guitars were designed with a 24-inch short scale neck, so it has a slinkier, looser feel in the strings. It's really the introduction of the offset body design became a really big design for guitars in general, this layout of offsetting the angles of the body itself. Think about the working musician, the one who's going to be playing on stage, playing jazz music, is going to be playing surf music in the studio. A guitar that was designed to be comfortable in a sitting position was advantageous for the player at that time. And with all that new design coming into play in the 60s, it made for a completely different feeling guitar from Fender staples, the Stratocaster and the Telecaster. Furthermore, the electronics and the pickup layup on these guitars were unique. The originality in the layout of the internal wiring and components is definitely an aspect that makes this guitar special. We have dual circuit electronics, so there's literally designed for a lead and a rhythm type of playing. And these guitars have a plethora of switches, rollers. It's honestly a bit of a maze of playing around with different sounds and trying to figure out a pickup configuration that you really enjoy. But the cool part about this guitar was back then it had the most features of frankly any guitar that was out there at the time. But because these guitars were ultimately used for genres and by players and by people that maybe Fender wasn't directly building them for, right? The working hardcore musician, the pro. A lot of these guitars were modified over the years. A lot of the pickup configuration was switched around. You'll see the finish stripped of the body and redone. You'll see breaks and damages. So an all original piece is pretty unique and rare to have in your hands. These original Jaguar pickups are bright, they're snappy. It has a very focused sound, and it's cool because they're actually shielded by metal claws. We'll do a little close-up so you can see how the metal around the pickup itself shields the pickup and actually affects how it sounds. Furthermore, some unique things going on at Fender at that time where these Jaguars and Jazzmasters came with a bridge mute. So it's literally a little piece that mutes the strings, kind of like you're doing a palm mute. Furthermore, it has a massive tremolo bar. I don't actually have it on the guitar right now, but there's literally a lockout, so you can lock out the massive tremolo if you don't want that to be more or less affecting the sound of your guitar while you're playing. Overall, these guitars are pretty rare to have in complete original condition. They were definitely used for, a different style of music that created, frankly, a whole new type of culture in guitar playing. So having one that's been, really untouched and unabused in original condition is definitely special. Sometimes people have these guitars and it's not that they're using them as a tool. They might be using them as a remembrance piece of remembering a loved one in their family. But there's nothing cooler than these guitars getting back out and doing what they're supposed to do. Full circle, Mike, the guy who owned this guitar originally and it was his grandfather's guitar, maybe he's not a player, but how cool is it that he's able to connect it with somebody like Derek that's able to, use this guitar to inspire people through his music. On top of that too, maybe it's something that he can then pass on to somebody else. And most importantly, maybe it's an investment piece that he's able to then give to his loved ones down the road. Whether it's the guitar itself or monetarily, or it's above all else the love of that maybe Derek's kids remember him playing this guitar someday. The same way that Mike remembers his grandfather playing this guitar, and it's an ongoing cycle. These guitars will very much outlive us. A guitar like this back in the 60s, brand new would be a few $100s. It's amazing where the value of these guitars go. Originality is a huge aspect. On this guitar, we put the original parts back on. We're not going to refret the guitar because originality is a big piece when it comes to the value of an instrument like this. Again, a lot of these guitars were modified over the years. These are working musicians' tools, right? Or somebody's, frankly, toy. So at the end of the day, it's pretty mind-blowing when a guitar has been loved and cared for 50 plus years. It's rare with all the original parts and in great condition. This is a guitar that's worth anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000, if not more. And that's something that's only going to appreciate. So we look at these guitars, it's so easy to look at the money value of them. Oh man, if I can obtain a guitar for $500 that's worth $40,000, then there's a big payday. But I argue that that's not the best way to do it, and that's not the goal. If you put other people and you put the human aspect before yourself, you find yourself in more situations to where you can obtain an instrument like this. And now you're a guy like Derek, where you thought you would never in your wildest dreams obtain something like your dream guitar, at a younger age. But sure enough, through connecting with humans and making situations happen and being a good person, you end up with a guitar like this. Not because Derek paid for it, but because he is supposed to be the keeper of this guitar and tell its story and pass that on to the next generation. Anyway, Hope you enjoyed this video of this 1965 Fender Jaguar. I'm going to plug it in, do some sound samples for you so you can hear what it sounds like. It's an amazing guitar. And think about how here we are in 2026, and this guitar, you're listening to it right now. That's not stopping, and you're able to connect with it. And if it was sitting on the wall somewhere, you wouldn't have that opportunity. Have a blessed day. Thanks so much for watching. Please follow along. Hit that subscribe button. Hope you like this 1965 Jaguar.